Hi, everyone. Welcome if you're tuning in. I'm assuming I am live right now, but I'm Claire. If you haven't met me already, I assume many of you from the GSV community have either passed by me at the summit over the years. If you haven't made a formal introduction, please say hi, email me. I know I've interacted with a lot of you through the Substack and the general GSV community as well. A little background on me, I lead our AI focus at GSV. And if you're coming to this through the ASU+GSV Summit, GSV specifically is a early stage edtech focused VC fund. We invest in early stage companies, seed, Series A, building in and innovating in education and workforce. And I specifically try to look for AI applications across pre-K to grade. I've been with the team for a few years now, and over the years started a Substack called AI Education. .substack.com. Anyone can subscribe to it. And I try to keep folks up with the AI space through that newsletter. We try to write weekly newsletter updates on all the new launches and products coming into the AI and education space. Sometimes it has very generalist releases, but other times it has education related ones. And we also frequently do a lot of GSV TV sessions. But this session is really meant to be a monthly AI debrief where we can talk about the big news that has come across in the last month, since there is just so much happening. And we only have about 45 minutes and I want to make sure we get to Q&A. So really this is meant to be rapid fire keynote style, talk about at a high level the themes and trends we're seeing, and then we'll go into Q&A. Specifically, I want to preface that the content is a little bit more catered towards a startup and builder audience. So if you are someone who is thinking about how AI is impacting your business, it doesn't have to be a tech or AI startup, but thinking about how AI impacts your institution, how you run a business, how you build a software startup. This is probably more relevant, but we'll try to also cover some super high level themes as well. So to kick off, we'll start with some key releases. Big model updates like GPT-5, Claude Opus 4.1, talk about a couple high level trends that we're seeing around how the ecosystem is shaping, and then talk about some tips and tools that I've personally been wowed by that I think would be relevant to everyone in this audience. Obviously, one of the biggest and most critical releases for our education AI space is just the launch of OpenAI releasing study mode, Claude launching education mode, and guided learning from Gemini. They all have very different names, but essentially what this means is that the AI labs are going all in on building tutor modes of their products. They've all characterized these as more Socratic versions of their products. And big differences mean that when you query it, it won't just give you a massive wall of text. It will try to chunk it and sequence it in a way that makes sense for a learner. Study mode, for example, will ask you what grade you're in, what subject you're trying to learn. So it's really interesting to see some of the most important companies in our era tackle building this. What is interesting is that, I've written pretty extensively about this, and you're definitely welcome. Would love for you all to read and share feedback on all my pieces on the AI tutors. But I think what's interesting is that I don't think any of these have actually achieved what I would like to see in a full AI tutor, and I write extensively about them. And I'll go into the limitations that we're seeing today. But what's interesting about building an AI tutor is one, it's very clear that they are seeing significant traction from students and therefore demand for a tutor mode. I think time and time again, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google have all very blatantly said that students are asking for a version of the tutor that will help them in their learning journeys. Most queries are learning adjacent, even if you're doing search. Even as someone who is in the workforce, a lot of my queries are not strictly productivity oriented. A lot of them are learning oriented. So it makes sense that they would build this. If you also think about it, it's also an interesting proving ground for a lot of different AI challenges because it means that they have to build a system that is able to route between answers that are more reasoning oriented or route between things that are more rote answer oriented. Building personalization is actually really difficult. I don't think AI labs have cracked this, and I'll talk about that later. And it's also a really interesting space to watch because clearly safety and ethics is very important in how we deliver learning and education. And so I think we'll start pioneering or seeing some of the early signals of how these labs will think about guardrails and safety in the education versions or teen versions of their chatbots. Limitation-wise, I go into this and feel free to read in depth, but I think today what we're seeing in terms of these tutor bots is that they're great. I think they're a fantastic first step. It shows that they care about building learning and education versions of these chatbots. But I think as an industry, we are still very far away from building persistent memory. And I don't think many chatbots or AI tutors that we've been pitched, even at GSV, have been able to tackle that. And that's purely because I think that is also an architectural problem. That is still a technical problem that researchers are at the biggest AI labs, very well funded, are pouring their energy into. And so I think because we haven't achieved persistent memory at a user level, it means that a lot of the tutor bots, even what you see with things like Conmigo or other, I'm sure many of you have seen other AI tutor platforms, they don't remember previous conversations or have limited ways of building associations between conversations. So you can't really build continuity within a subject and remember that Claire struggled with this and spent a lot of time on this part of a subject or this part of a concept, let's rehash it. So it's pretty difficult to actually rehash the experience of a one-on-one tutor experience if that tutor doesn't really have long-term memory about you. Other problems, inherent to how models are built around sycophancy. I think the models still today lean people-pleasing. So that's probably not optimal if you're trying to build a great learning environment. So all of these different limitations. So all in all, we're still very early in this. It's great to see the AI labs invest in building products around this. And I think each lab will have very different strategic angles. Definitely leave questions and comments if you have any. I'm happy to dive deep into what I think are the different strategic angles between the three big labs. In terms of another big launch from this month, GPT-5 obviously made a splash. I think what was interesting about this one on a personal level was that if you saw the GPT-3 to 4 leap, it was a pretty big leap in intelligence. People were pretty wowed by the step changes in reasoning and capabilities. However, this time, I think if you just are looking at GPT-5 in raw IQ or intelligence, a lot of people were somewhat underwhelmed. And I think it's actually not necessarily a bad thing because I think what this change was actually much more about building better UX and building more accessibility. And I'll go into that. But what's new about GPT-5 is essentially that it is a unified system. So for a lot of people, they struggled with using, and they still do, if they're using Anthropic or using other models where there are model menus, you just don't know the difference between GPT 4.0 or using GPT 3.5. What does it mean for your everyday user? It probably doesn't make a difference for them. So now they have a unified system, and it's actually architecturally really smart that you have a router that picks the best model depending on the query. So it actually acts much more like a human in that sense. It's doing the work of identifying that, yes, this is a simple query. Let's use a fast model. Oh, this is a complex query that's asking me to use tools to have multi-step planning. I need to run more inference and compute. And so that means that now as a user, GPT-5 is the default. And that means fewer decisions for users. That also means that a lot of people who never had access to a reasoning model now have access to reasoning capabilities, which you have to remember, and I'll go into this in the next slide, is that 98% of ChatGPT users are free users. So they have never experienced chain of thought reasoning, never experienced letting a model just run for 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time and do work in a multi-step workflow. So that's new, and I think it's important to talk about what that means in aligning it with how people think about standards of their AI systems. And then other interesting things like, they have personalities embedded. Voice mode can now combine with study and learn. In their demo, they showcase a language learning example, for example. So you can go watch that, but you can now use advanced voice mode, but have it in that Socratic mode. And then another, I think, thing worth noting is that they also are integrating Google Calendar and Gmail, which clearly shows that they are coming for productivity agents. So soon you can say, help me plan my day. It will plug into your email. It will plug into the context from your Google Calendar. I think the big takeaway here is really that this update was not as much about getting closer to AGI or insane raw intelligence, but rather about accessibility and actually making these things more usable. I think what you have to remember is that for most users, a lot of these model versions are somewhat meaningless. And I've often shared with founders that I think fixating on, oh, we have the state of the art model trained on XYZ, I think is important if you're especially doing something around safety or doing subject matter specific model delivery outputs. However, I think remembering that most users cannot tell the difference if you have used a really a fine-tuned model on XYZ data set versus one that didn't. So I think remembering that if you are able to build a system that is smart about routing what models you're delivering to the users, I think that actually levels you up. And that actually also saves you if you're building with AI models, because you don't need to run a query through a PhD level model every single time. It also means that for users, navigating and talking to your system becomes a much more seamless experience. It means that they don't have to remember that, oh, I need to use a reasoning model for a research task or a simple model for a productivity task. So remembering, again, that end users typically do not know the difference between, or probably do not care as much as you might think about frontier model level capabilities. Another big one I wanted to call out was DeepMind Genie 3. And I know I'm actually tight on time, so I will try to speed through these. But Genie 3 was, I think, much more of a sci-fi release from this month. It essentially allows you to build interactive 3D world models. And what's different about world models versus video models is that you can actually explore them. So video models, think of them as, I mean, they are diffusion-based, so they're basically trained off of patterns of videos, and that you can't explore. But a world model is really something where you can actually put an agent in and they can explore. And so what's different about this one is that you can actually interact with it in real time. It will generate in real time. So if I walk through a door in that world, or if I turn to the side, it will generate that in real time. There is no need for someone to manually build a world or manually write rules about this world. It will do so independently. Another really cool part of this is world memory and consistency. So if you walk away from a painting that you've done in this world, you will be able to walk back. And then really cool things like promptable events. You can say in real time, as you're driving a boat, you can say, I would like it to start raining, or I would like a dolphin to jump out of the water. And then the other really cool thing is that it is physics aware. So it knows how water flows. It knows how fire flickers, and it doesn't have a coded physics engine. So nothing is telling it that, oh, these physics properties are happening. It's not rule of space. It is inferring on its own. And so this is important because it essentially is a training ground for AI agents. And in order for us to have real agents that work, and especially as you think about an AI agent that is doing physical work for you in the real world, it needs to be able to reason and plan and face unseen situations, and to be able to pivot. So it's a great, essentially, simulative way to teach agents about cause and effect, about physical consistency. People are excited about what this unlocks for physical AI and humanoids. And I would say for me, this really feels like a GPT-2 type moment for world models. It's still very compute intensive. I don't think it means that it's going to displace XR companies anytime soon. It is still in research preview, but I think it tells us a lot about what's coming. And I think it means that my thesis is that you are going to see a vibe coding moment for 3D and XR immersive content in the next 5 to 10 years, where historically building video games, building 3D environments, the barrier was always cost and time. Now you can actually have this instant prototyping, and not today, sorry. I mean, when we do get there. And so I think that'll be exciting for just the development of XR, because historically the content has always been the barrier. And then two, I think it means that people will expect dynamic experiences. They don't want to go into XR and have a static pre-scripted conversation. I think people will increasingly want to see more one-to-one adaptive experiences. I'll zoom through these, but other models include Claude Opus 4.1. This is, an upgraded version of Claude's Opus 4 model. It's great at coding. If you're building AI coding assistants, would highly recommend Claude's models. And it has an update where it allows AI agents to handle longer running flows. Another big on the model front, big news was just OpenAI going back to its roots of actually launching an open source model. They launched two. One is the 120 billion parameter one, which can run on a single 80 gigabyte GPU. And it's supposedly as on par with OpenAI's GPT-4o mini model. And then the other one is 20 billion parameters, and that's actually light enough to run on edge devices. So it means that you can run locally on a consumer PC or on a phone, and that actually unlocks a lot as you think about bringing AI to expanding AI access, but bringing AI tutors to rural regions and such. DeepSeek launched its v3.1. It has similar to GPT-5, you have kind of this combination of hybrid inference, basically one model that can switch between thinking and non-thinking modes. So these models are getting smarter, not only at the final output, but also actually understanding what we want out of them. And then obviously enhanced tool usage. Another really cool one that's been making waves the last few days has been Gemini's Nano Banana. I would highly recommend checking some of those out, but you can do everything from building character consistency, so you can actually give yourself a costume. You can upload a photo of yourself or a pet, and your face will maintain consistency. That's actually historically been kind of a tough problem. If you've generated things, it's hard to build character consistency. Another cool thing that you can do with it is multi-image fusion. You can blend two photos together and create a brand new scene here. And that now a lot of this image editing is not just one shot. It's not just build me a room with a wall and pink walls and a bookshelf and a couch. You don't have to visualize the final output. You can actually build iteratively. So you can start with the room, then the walls, then the shelves. As it relates to building, thinking about how we build companies and how the ecosystem will evolve, I think one thing is becoming really clear, which is, and you can see this with the tutor example, is that memory is becoming the new mode. Memory matters because I think there is raw AI horsepower matters. However, it's really that layer around it and what you're doing and plugging into this broader system that changes the user experience. And very critically, that is memory. And you might be wondering, okay, these AI models have context windows. It means that they can collect a lot of information with every query. Why do I need memory? Context is, you can think of it as like a scratch pad. And they come in different sizes. So you can give someone a massive scratch pad and they can do a lot with that. However, memory is different because memory is able to essentially sequence a ton of different interactions and retain across all of them, versus that scratch pad is a one-time, context handoff. And I think memory matters because we know that if we want personalization, if we want to build agents that remember things, if you want to build a co-pilot that is able to remember what records you pulled last week, or an agent that remembers that you did this exact lesson plan generation query 2 weeks ago and you want it in the exact same format, you need to build in memory as opposed to having your users recreate that workflow over and over again. And I think most critically, as you think about just startup moats, memory is essentially now, moats are no longer about having better tech. And then there are a ton of moats, as always, for startups. But memory increasingly is what makes switching costs very emotional. And it is why people stick with an OpenAI versus a Claude. It's why you're seeing Claude launch memory. Because if my AI system already has all this memory over what workflows I like to do, my code base, my CRM history. I don't necessarily want to switch to a completely new model, even if it has slightly better raw horsepower. So you think about that in an AI tutor setting. And I know we talk a lot about AI tutors. Hopefully in Q&A, I will have more time to talk about other startup use cases. But in an AI tutor example, if this tutor has been if this AI system has been my tutor for the last 3 to 4 years, it's seen me grow throughout high school. It's seen my interests and passions evolve. I don't want to have to retrain a new model. So you can kind of see how the memory plus data and distribution all become this massive flywheel. I kind of covered a lot of this, but there's more technical ways about thinking about memory. There's really 3 layers. I think there's short-term memory, long-term memory, and semantic memory. But memory is basically user lock-in. Because of that, you're also seeing a new sort of browser wars. You have OpenAI launching a web browser to challenge Chrome. You have Perplexity launching Comet. What's different about, you might ask, what's different about a AI browser versus Chrome is that it can tap into information and context on your screen. So you can ask it to focus your questions on specific tabs. You can ask it to manage your email and calendar. You can actually find answers based off of your own activity because it has recall of what pages you've seen. And essentially, it is a much more personalized query experience because it has so much more information on the information that you're intaking. Same thing with something called Dia. That's another one in the AI browser space. And then, it made news this week, but Perplexity made a long shot offer for Chrome since, they're facing some antitrust. Google is facing some antitrust issues and potentially may have to spin off Chrome. This is more, I think, a marketing stunt, but it shows how important the browser space is because it means that you get access to so much data and surface area of data of a user, what you read, what you search, what you buy. And whoever actually controls, and it's important for an OpenAI too, is because even if you build all these AI agents, whoever owns the surface area where work is being done also owns the distribution of when agents get used for that work. So if an OpenAI has an agent and the browser, it is much more likely to recognize when the best moment is to say, hey, do you want our shopping agent? Let me suggest a shopping agent for this workflow. And then when you combine that surface area plus memory, you just have this really interesting combination of forces that make it a very sticky experience. And if you think about how, we've monetized the future of the web, and we'll go into that, for ad targeting, AI agent marketplaces, there's just a lot of things that you can do by owning the browser. And I think to that end, I want to talk about SEO and GEO because I think this is very top of mind for everyone, even if you are a higher ed institution, thinking about how you market yourself to future students. If you are a workforce company, if you are a startup, how do you get your word out? And historically, it's relied on SEO, keyword search. People click through 10 blue links. They would find their most optimal destination and stick with it. Now that process is completely being disintermediated, and you are just going directly to your chatbot of choice, and you are given information on a plate. And in that environment, that means people are clicking a lot less links and going to a lot less websites. They are, you see this behavior where people are less likely to click on a link when they have a Google AI overview. So you can, a good example of this is Chegg saying that they're seeing a decline in search traffic because, well, one, students are going directly into a ChatGPT to make those queries. However, they're also, if they are putting in a query about a textbook, a Google AI review will give you the answer directly. I don't need to go into a separate website to go look for that information. So in that sense, discovery is completely changing. That also means the economics of the internet is completely changing. It means that we are no longer running on an internet that is driven by ads and clicks and eyeballs when humans might not even be navigating the web. They might have their AI agents doing all of it. There's a future where people don't even type or click. They just talk to an AI agent and the agent handles the entire workflow and information discovery process. So when humans are not the end users, are you building systems that are, is there a world where you're doing SEO for AI agents? I've brought this up a couple of times, but when you ask Claude to buy flowers, it'll automatically route to, they have preferences. So it'll automatically say, you should buy flowers from 1-800-Flowers. OpenAI automatically surfaces the first link on Bing. And then Google also has separate preferences. So these AI agents themselves have preferences. And so it fundamentally changes how we think about discovery, but also paying for ads, how you get traffic out. And so in that world, a couple of things I've heard around the space, and all of these aren't necessarily tried and true tricks. I think people are navigating this in real time. I think it's no longer just about creating clickable, keyword-driven content. It is also about building citable content. So making sure that if you want information surface, it is structured in a way that is easily cited for AI. Less 2,000-word blogs and more chunks and value-driven information, because if an AI system wants to surface something, it will typically look for chunks and more expert sources. Other things like, I think again, this is bound to change because these AI models are black boxes and every platform is different. But what we are seeing is that models are overweighting certain sources like Wikipedia, Reddit, YouTube, and academic papers. So can you build more distribution and presence across higher surface areas? And then, just on your own, try with synthetic query testing. Can you run queries against ChatGPT, Perplexity, see how your brand is surfaced, and maybe try A/B testing things? Can you build more? Can you make sure that your website document is structured for not only human consumption, but AI consumption as well? And then also less of a focus on just keyword stuffing to citable content. And then I know I've gotten a couple of questions about this from folks just on the impact of AI on the environment, and definitely think there are a lot of things that still need to be sorted on this front. I think we have definitely more questions than answers at this point. However, there was an interesting, and you're seeing Meta build 1 gigawatt size AI data centers the size of Manhattan in Tennessee and such. So that is still actively happening. But I think what was an interesting development in the last few weeks was that Google actually gave us the first concrete measurement of AI's energy use, at least for Gemini. And what they saw was that a median Gemini text prompt was about 0.24 watt hours. So this is for just running inference, not necessarily for model training, which is a whole other story and is data, or it is energy intensive. But a Gemini prompt is essentially equivalent to about 5 drops of water and a few breaths equivalent in CO2. And also, if you're thinking about just data center usage, it is equivalent to watching TV for about 9 seconds. So, and then, I've heard other comparisons, and other people have done the math of, a round trip flight to London is 500,000 ChatGPT prompts. So that's not discounting that there are very real consequences in building these massive data centers. People are impacted by it. That is definitely a concern and something that we have to talk about. But as it relates to actually running the models themselves, and this is, excluding the training side, running the models themselves on an individual level, the prompts are actually getting a lot more efficient. We're now in just 1 year seeing 33 times less energy used per prompt. And so obviously that changes when you, again, look at it at scale, when you have millions of queries a day. But this is an interesting, if you're interested in the topic, and I know many people are, would highly recommend looking at Google's report. And they talk a lot about the different things and techniques they use to make their AI systems more efficient. And then finally, I know we have about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to questions. But a couple of interesting tips and tools I've seen is one, Higgs field. That's been making waves. This is basically a video model. And of course, there are a lot of fantastic video models. VO3 is Google's one. It's great because it's trained on YouTube data, but you also have Midjourney. And so you have a lot of options available, but I do think that the Higgs field has done a good job of creating these preset templates. They also have a really interesting new feature, which again is almost similar to what we saw with the Nano Banana image generation feature. But all these things can now, you can use natural language to change things. So you can actually, there's a feature now called draw to video, where you can quite literally point at part of the video, create a text box and say, I want a man to fall down from the ceiling. This is the scene from Limitless. I can't play a video just because we're on CVent right now, but would highly recommend looking at some of their demos, and then say, I want Cat here. And in terms of the character, I want him to do this action. And so you can see that it actually generates in real time. Same thing for this. You can say what you want to appear and what happens in what part of the video. So it's much more akin to telling a person what I want changed, as opposed to having to prompt something from scratch. I can take an existing video or existing content and make changes to it using English, not using code, not using SQL or any technical language. You are using English to make changes to content without having to know any Adobe or creative workflows. So same thing for this interstellar scene. And then what's cool is that they have a bunch of different templates as well. I've gotten a lot of questions also about companies that help with generative engine optimization. One that just raised recently from Sequoia, a Series B, I believe about $35 million, is Profound. And they basically are a system that helps you figure out your brand presence with AI chatbots. And so they are able to track citations. They can look at how your brand is being surfaced in AI generated answers. And they're also able to then help you with writing marketing materials and A/B testing them across these platforms. Same thing for another one called Goody. It's pretty similar. You can kind of analyze how keywords are being tracked by these AI chatbots. You can analyze competitors. There's another very similar one. I would say all three of these are pretty similar, called Daydream. And then also one called Ahrefs, which is a little less, I would say, much more focused on brand visibility. But there is, again, this new generation of companies focused on this massive shift from SEO to GEO. And then finally, another one, just I know that, it does come in handy when you need to create custom music for videos or for marketing materials. With 11 Labs, they've gone beyond just voice generation to music generation. And they're mostly focused on these short sound bites for studio grade audio that is multilingual. And it is able to be used for commercial and creative use. So you can use for films, TVs, podcasts, gaming, social media. And there's more details on the music usage, but thought it'd be helpful, especially for anyone in kind of the creative industry, or if you are creating any materials that require music. So I forgot to create a Q&A slide, but I guess I'll end on this one, or we can go back to the main header slide. But I will now look at any questions. Please include any in the chat. I will try to get through as many of them as possible. The first one being that, do you think that all students going to OpenAI, Claude, Google are looking for tutor mode, or are the students going to those tools actually looking for answers? I think the answer is both. I think cheating is not a new phenomenon, as anyone in the education space knows very well. Cheating has existed, and people will cheat the system and assessment no matter what you do, how you do it. We've seen humanizers for Turnitin emerge in the last few years. So there's always this, I think, cat and mouse game between cheating and actually genuinely trying to learn. So I agree. I think students are definitely just going to OpenAI, Google Claude to get answers. There is that dynamic happening for sure. But I also do think people genuinely want to learn. If I think about my own, I had the chance to speak with some of the folks at some of these AI labs, and I just said that my own workflow, I think I have a very different workflow for when I'm doing productivity-oriented queries versus learning-oriented queries. And there are times when I just want to actually go down a rabbit hole. I want to be able to, I think Notebook LM does a really good example of this, where you can put in a subject and it creates a mental map of all the potential rabbit holes and topics you could go into. I love that feature. And I think students are looking for things like that too. Another nugget I would also point to is, I think, at least, we've done interesting partnerships with Walton and and Gallup on how Gen Z is thinking about AI, and they are actually quite self-aware about AI usage and what it does potentially long-term to cognitive decline. And so I think my long answer to this is, or short answer to all of this is that yes, I think kids are just going to get answers for sure. But I also think there is a desire to learn, and I'm excited that at least these AI labs are building a way to get to a learning version of it, even if it's not perfect today. When are the higher models really needed? Even when ChatGPT says you've reached your free limit and drops me down to another platform level, the output is still excellent. Yes, I agree. So I actually think this is a great example of showing that a lot of times the end user doesn't necessarily need a really expensive, $10 per million input token price query. You don't need a reasoning model. So the analogy that I think these AI labs typically use is like, some of these models are master's level, PhD level, some of them are college degree level. I don't know how they're benchmarking that, but I think you can think of it in the same way that there are tasks that you don't necessarily need. If you are asking someone to just find 5 restaurants in the neighborhood that serve great pizza, probably someone with a college degree could find that. So I think in that sense, there are times when you are doing really intense computational research. You are trying to discover new proteins. You are doing research work. I think at a university research level, that's when a lot of these higher level reasoning models come in. But very honestly, for me, I would say only even 5 to 10% of my usage, it really relies on a higher reasoning model. I would say most of my queries are, pretty standard. Google's bananas and Apple's expanded Apple Intelligence make multimodal creation easy. What guardrails will schools be requesting from EdTech AI before letting students generate or edit imagery? I think this is a really important question. I think right now there are not a lot of, and this is where I actually think there should be more regulation, is I think a lot of people are fixated on regulate, and I think there's a lot of regulation that needs to come, but there is a lot of regulation focused more so on limiting the compute size of these models. I actually think that's maybe we shouldn't, and maybe on an AGI front, that is important to think about. I think there are definitely concerns there, but I actually think we should be regulating at a state and federal level a lot of the applications of AI. So deepfakes, using people's image without their consent. I think those things are applications of AI, and I think we are seeing some pushes to regulate that. You're seeing in other countries like Denmark, I believe has some regulation around deepfakes now. So at least right now, I'm not aware of any schools having official policies. With Google's Banana Nano model, they actually have something called Synth ID. So it's a watermark in their metadata, and that so far, I think actually everything that you output from it will have a little AI on the side. So you can't output anything with and try pass it as non-AI. So I would look into something called Synth ID that Google is pioneering in this space. But to be totally honest, I think it is still evolving in real time. Do you see Grok as being a meaningful competitor to watch over the next year? I think that Grok is interesting. They certainly have a lot of talent there. They are, I would say, one of the important AI labs among OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Perplexity maybe even more application layer, DeepSeek. So in terms of big model providers, I would say those are the big 5. I think that Grok has maybe also been a little bit focused on benchmark winning, and to the point where in this webinar, I've talked about how sometimes benchmarks don't mean everything. For your end user, they're not going to know the difference oftentimes. And there are games, and as we know, with any assessment, there are ways to game assessments and ways to game benchmarks. So I think Grok has been making waves for winning on certain benchmarks, but in terms of actual usage, I would say OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Meta, maybe, are probably ahead. There was also a recent controversy where I think Elon is going to sue Apple and OpenAI for allegedly only, gatekeeping ChatGPT as the #1 chatbot. So I think as it relates to actually using their models, good option. I think there's also a whole other set of things to talk about as it relates to Grok as a consumer offering. I would say Grok is probably, if you're thinking about chatbots and safety and guardrails, Grok is the least safe. They very publicly have released like AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends, and it is a product, and they know they're very okay with launching that. And so if that is something you are uncomfortable with your users or your students interacting with on a consumer level, I would say that is also something worth noting. Universities have been cautious to adopt AI tutors and AI teaching assistants. What are the concerns you hear? I think very validly, this technology is still very new. It's only been 2 or 3 years. I think a lot of the concerns, I feel like at least, and a lot of you all in the audience are way closer to the higher ed market than I am. But from a lot of the CIOs or presidents that I've been speaking to, or even faculty, I think that the conversation was very focused on cheating in the early days. And I think now, and so that was, I think, one initial friction point. I think as with any new technology, I think it is 2 parts technology and 8 parts change management. And so I think at a university, there are all these barriers around adoption. I think a lot of faculty are validly concerned about what this does for learning and metacognition. I think it's important to ask those questions. But I think generally my analysis is that, one, I don't think these AI tutors are really at a place where any of them are replacing true human one-to-one tutoring and the promise of Bloom's taxonomy. Like, I don't think we're there yet, just purely on a capability standpoint with everything I laid out around memory, around circumvency. These AI tutors aren't multimodal. How are you supposed to teach a great STEM course or physics course if you can't analyze and draw graphs in real time? And AI models are not there yet. I think you can do it, but it's hard to, I think at the product layer, I haven't seen a great example of it. And so I think the product's probably not at a level where universities feel like it is, acceptable for one-to-one teaching. And then I also think just the concerns around how these AI bots are black boxes. So I think universities in that sense, on an ethics and safety standpoint, have concerns. Regarding persistent memory, how are you seeing companies work around this challenge using existing third-party solutions paired up with an LLM? So I can go very deep into this, but there's actually a bunch of really interesting infrastructure coming up around building the memory layer that are actually building, I kind of like MCP, or I don't know, the best way to phrase it is like a passport for your memory that you can plug in, and for software solutions to plug into. I think one of these is called, I might be blanking on it, it's like Mem0 or something, but I actually have been thinking about writing about memory, so I will include a bunch of the companies that are tackling that in a Substack piece in the future. But there are companies that are essentially percolating around this opportunity to be that continuous memory layer across the software and the web. I know we are running out of time, so I will try to take 2 more. There is a real possibility of a rural or urban divide for skill development and AI adoption in K-12 schools. Do you know any established efforts to help rural schools develop skills? I think there are a lot of great groups, and at a philanthropic level and a funder level, you are seeing big efforts to push AI literacy. I think in this last year alone, AFT had a partnership with OpenAI and Microsoft and Anthropic that they just launched, I think, this summer, to help with AI literacy and starting with teacher training. I think you have great groups like Amanda Bickerstaff at AI for Education, or Alex Kodran at AI EDU, or many others that are doing really important work of building those AI competencies for school districts. So I would say those are the ones that come to mind, but I do agree that I think there is a skill gap that might emerge, because the reality is companies are looking for, and I'm already seeing that, you're already seeing this in terms of just the most saturated AI usage in the software engineering space. Every single startup or company that we speak to they are looking for engineers that know how to code and use AI agents to code alongside them to maximize productivity, but to also be better software engineers. So I think, just as you think about the opportunity to funnel people into an emerging AI workforce, the skill gap is very important to address. And then, how quickly do you believe incumbent edtech organizations will adopt AI-based innovations compared to other verticals? I think that we are seeing interesting pushes from Instructure, PowerSchool. Duolingo is a great example of an incumbent edtech that is honestly at the AI forefront. Grammarly is doing interesting stuff with AI agents. So I would say probably in the first year and a half, we saw a lot of tools that a lot of tools and startups. And then in the last year or two, I would say we've finally seen incumbents come in and absorb a lot of those tools. So it has been harder to exist as a tool startup. You really have to think about what your platform advantage is. I do think edtech, there is a bit of a lag, just given how you deal with student data, how you deal with that cultural inertia and institutional change management. I've heard of districts or certain schools that, even though Instructure is offering AI add-ons, that they want to turn it off because they just don't feel comfortable with it yet. So even if these incumbent edtech organizations offer them, we are also seeing on the kind of user front, perhaps not a market readiness for those tools. So I know I went over time, but this has been fantastic. I hope you join me for another session soon. We'll try to do one at the end of the month in September, but you can expect more of these where we talk about high-level changes to the ecosystem. As always, would love any and all feedback if you feel like we spent too much time on model releases, or if you wanted more of the high-level ecosystem updates, or if you wanted more of a focus on impact on society. Happy to go down all of those. We love talking about AI here, and we're excited to hopefully be a guiding force as you all think about how all of this changes in the future.